A story has been circulating in WNBA content circles claiming that Liz Cambage was offered a roster spot with the Indiana Fever, that she turned it down specifically because of head coach Stephanie White, and that her rejection exposes a toxic culture surrounding Caitlin Clark. It's a compelling story. It's also, as far as any verifiable reporting shows, not one that's been confirmed by a single credible sports outlet. Before unpacking why that distinction matters, it's worth being upfront about what is actually true here, because Cambage's real history is dramatic enough without embellishment, and Stephanie White's real coaching record raises real questions on its own. Who Liz Cambage actually is? Liz Cambage is an Australian professional basketball player, currently playing for Sichuan Yuanda in the Women's Chinese Basketball Association. Wikipedia. Having won that league's championship in 2024, Wikipedia. She shares the WNBA single-game scoring record with Aja Wilson, having scored 53 points against the New York Liberty on July 17, 2018, Wikipedia. A legitimately historic performance that cemented her as one of the most physically dominant post players the league has seen. At her peak, the description of her as a 68 matchup nightmare with a soft shooting touch isn't hype. It's accurate. But her career has also been defined by an unusually long list of short, contentious stops. Since being drafted in 2011, Cambage has played for 4 WNBA teams and several more overseas, and has never played consecutive seasons with one franchise, just women's sports. She was vocal from the start about not wanting to play for the team that drafted her, expressing reluctance to play for the Tulsa Shock, and saying she wasn't going to the WNBA to be made into a franchise player. Wikipedia. She skipped the 2012 season's end entirely, then left the league for 5 years after the 2013 season, Wikipedia. After returning in 2018, she requested a trade out of Dallas after just one season and was sent to Las Vegas, Wikipedia. Her exit from the league in 2022 was the most public flashpoint. Cambage left the Los Angeles Sparks 25 games into the season, later telling Bleacher Report's Taylor Rooks she left because of a toxic situation, and denied allegations that she'd used a racial slur toward the Nigerian national team during a pre-Olympic scrimmage, just women's sports. The Sparks organization didn't substantively engage with her claims beyond a brief statement about an amicable split, and many people, including former teammates and opponents, publicly questioned the validity of what she said, just women's sports. Around the same time, she posted that she was stepping away from the WNBA, for the time being to focus on her healing and personal growth, and said she hoped the league would do its part to create safer environments and a stronger support system for players, ESPN, without specifying what action she wanted taken. That's the real Cambage, an undeniably talented player whose career has been shaped by repeated conflict, who has consistently framed her exits as responses to mistreatment, and whose claims have just as consistently been met with skepticism from people who were in the room. Both things are true at once, and neither cancels the other out. That tension, talent versus turbulence, her account versus institutional silence, is exactly the kind of ambiguity that makes her an easy subject for speculative content to exploit. Where the Indiana Fever story actually comes from searching for any confirmation of a Cambage-Fever offer turns up no reporting from ESPN, the Indianapolis Star, Yahoo Sports, or any other outlet with sourcing standards. What does turn up is a YouTube video with a title built for clicks rather than accuracy, language like humiliated live, and dramatic framing that mirrors, almost word for word, the script making the rounds. There's no named source for the claim that White personally called Cambage, no confirmation Cambage said anything about the Fever specifically, and no record of witnesses being referenced in connection with this supposed offer. This matters because it follows a pattern that's become common in WNBA-adjacent content. Take a real, sympathetic figure with a documented grievance history, splice in old quotes from unrelated interviews, attach them to a currently trending storyline. In this case, the intense media attention around Caitlin Clark and the Fever, and present the result as a unified, breaking narrative. The quotes about leaking tapes and being disrespected by a GM and ownership appear to be lifted from Cambage's past comments about previous teams, not anything she said about Indiana. Stitching them into a new context doesn't make the new context true. What's actually verifiable about Stephanie White's tenure? None of this means the Fever's environment is beyond scrutiny. There's real reporting on tension within the organization, just not the version being circulated. A claim that White had been fired, pushed by commentator Skip Bayless, was directly debunked by Indy Star reporter Chloe Peterson, who said there was absolutely no validity to it and confirmed White remained the head coach, Yahoo Sports. Bayless doubled down anyway, predicting White wouldn't last much longer given friction with Clark during games, while also acknowledging that White's issues with Caitlin might be mostly valid. Yahoo Sports. That's a useful detail. Even a commentator pushing an unfounded firing rumor characterized the coach-star friction as something with legitimate substance on both sides, not a simple villain narrative. There's also confirmed recent reporting that complicates the toxic coach framing in the opposite direction. In a June 24, 2026 loss to the Phoenix Mercury, White was reportedly livid over what she considered uncalled, cheap shots against Clark, including a play where Alyssa Thomas appeared to push her fist into Clark's neck, ESPN. That's a coach publicly going to bat for her star player against the league's officiating, not exactly the behavior of someone indifferent to her team's well-being. Separately, an Indiana man was charged with stalking Fever player Sophie Cunningham and sending her threatening, explicit messages, ESPN. A reminder that the Fever organization is dealing with real external pressures around player safety that have nothing to do with coaching style. So the honest picture of White's tenure is a coach under intense scrutiny, with at least one prominent commentator suggesting friction with her star player is real, but no credible reporting establishing a toxic locker room pattern, and at least one recent instance of her visibly advocating for Clark rather than against her interests. Why the rumor is appealing anyway, it's worth sitting with why this kind of story works, because the mechanics are instructive. Caitlin Clark draws enormous attention, and any claim that ties a beloved star to institutional dysfunction generates engagement almost automatically. Sympathy for Clark, suspicion of the coach, and a sense of insider access, leaked tapes. Witnesses, that feels like real reporting without needing to clear the bar of actual sourcing. Cambage, for her part, has a real history of saying she was mistreated, which makes her a plausible vessel for this kind of claim even when the specific claim attached to her is fabricated or unverified. The story borrows credibility from true things, her real scoring record, her real conflicts, White's real scrutiny, and uses them to make an unverified claim feel grounded. This is also why it's worth being skeptical of WNBA news that arrives exclusively through monetized YouTube commentary rather than newsrooms with editorial standards. That doesn't mean every claim from independent commentary is false, or that beat reporters catch everything first. But when a story this specific and this dramatic, a named coach, a named star, a flat rejection, a promise of leaked tapes, exists in zero wire reports, zero beat reporter tweets, and zero team statements, that absence is itself informative. The fair version of the underlying questions strip away the fabricated rejection story, and there's a legitimate question still standing. Is the environment around Caitlin Clark in Indiana serving her well? That's a real, ongoing conversation in WNBA media, fueled by genuine reporting, officiating disputes, the Cunningham stalking case, roster turnover, and a coach operating under a level of public pressure most WNBA coaches never face. Clark herself has continued performing at an elite level while she and Aaliyah Boston currently lead the second fan returns in 2026 WNBA All-Star voting, ESPN, which suggests whatever internal friction exists hasn't dimmed either her output or her popularity. Whether Stephanie White is the right coach to manage the unique circumstances of coaching the league's most watched player is a fair, debatable question that reasonable people answer differently. It just doesn't need an invented Liz Cambage rejection story to be worth asking. If you want, I can pull together what's actually been reported on the Fever's locker room dynamics and Clark's relationship with the coaching staff this season. There's real material there without needing speculation to fill the gaps. A story has been making the rounds in WNBA content circles. The claim: Liz Cambage had a real offer from the Indiana Fever, turned it down flat, and named the reason in blunt terms: she would not play for a locker room run by Stephanie White. The story comes packaged with quotes about leaking the tapes, about witnesses, about disrespect from a GM and ownership who simply didn't care. It's a dramatic, emotionally satisfying story. It is also, as far as any verifiable reporting shows, not a story that has been confirmed by a single newsroom with editorial standards. Before getting into why that gap matters, it's worth laying out carefully and with sourcing what's actually true about Liz Cambage, what's actually true about Stephanie White's season, and where the real tension in Indiana's locker room genuinely lives. Because there is real tension. It's just not the tension this story describes. Who Liz Cambage actually is, and why she's a believable vessel for this story start with the player at the center of the rumor. Because the rumor only works if you accept a caricature of her that isn't quite accurate either. Liz Cambage is an Australian professional basketball player currently playing for Sichuan Yuanda in the Women's Chinese Basketball Association, where she won the league championship in 2024, ESPN. Her resume contains a legitimately historic accomplishment. She shares the WNBA single-game scoring record with Ja Wilson after a 53-point outburst against the New York Liberty on July 17, 2018, ESPN. At her physical peak, the scouting description that gets repeated about her, a 68, low post force with a soft shooting touch who terrified opposing coaches, isn't exaggeration. It's an accurate summary of one of the most dominant interior scorers the WNBA has had. But her career has just as consistently been defined by friction, and that friction is real, documented, and predates any rumored Fever connection by years. Since being drafted in 2011, Cambage has played for 4 different WNBA franchises and several overseas teams in China, Australia, and Israel, and has never played consecutive seasons with the same WNBA team, Facebook. The pattern started immediately. She told reporters in March 2011 that she didn't want to play for the Tulsa Shock, the team that had drafted her, saying she wasn't going to the WNBA to be made into a franchise player, ESPN. The following year, she was due to fly back to finish the 2012 season with Tulsa, but announced on the morning of her scheduled flight that she wouldn't return, with her agent citing exhaustion from national team duty, ESPN. She came back for one more season in 2013, then left the WNBA entirely for 5 years ESPN. When she returned in 2018 and put up the record-setting numbers in Dallas, the stability still didn't follow. She requested a trade out of Dallas in January 2019 after just one season under a multi-year deal and was sent to Las Vegas that May, ESPN. Her time with the Aces included its own complications. She sat out the entire 2020 season over COVID-19 health concerns following a team doctor's evaluation, ESPN. And in May 2021, she publicly clashed with opposing coach Curt Miller after he lobbied officials for a foul call while describing her, hyperbolically, as 300 pounds, prompting Cambage to call him a little white man on Instagram, ESPN. Her departure from the Los Angeles Sparks in 2022 remains the most consequential break in her career. And it's the moment that did the most to shape the public narrative she's still fighting today. Cambage left the team 25 games into the 2022 season, and the Sparks subsequently lost 8 of their final 9 games to fall out of playoff contention, finishing with the second-worst record in the league, ESPN. Months later, in an hour-and-a-half interview with Bleacher Report's Taylor Rooks, she said she'd signed with the Sparks on what she called a Hollywood lie involving impermissible benefits, and that she left midway through the season because of a toxic situation, just women's sports. In that same interview, she denied having used a racial slur against the Nigerian national team during a pre-Olympic scrimmage, saying video footage would show she had actually been assaulted, just women's sports. Footage that circulated afterward did show a Nigerian player running at her and striking her, though it didn't resolve the underlying dispute about what she'd said, just women's sports. Notably, many people, including former teammates and opponents, publicly questioned the validity of Cambage's claims, and the Sparks organization never substantively addressed her allegations beyond a brief statement describing an amicable separation, just women's sports. A few weeks after that, Cambage posted on Instagram that she was stepping away from the WNBA, for the time being to focus on her healing and personal growth, adding that she hoped the league would do its part to create safer environments and a stronger support system for players, without specifying what changes she wanted, ESPN. It was notably the 3rd time in her career that she had effectively forced her way out of a team, Facebook. Put it all together, and you get a player who is undeniably one of the most talented post players of her generation, who has a long, real history of describing her departures as responses to mistreatment, and whose specific claims have just as long a history of being met with public skepticism from people who shared locker rooms with her. Both halves of that are true simultaneously, and neither cancels the other out. That unresolved tension, genuine talent paired with a genuine pattern of conflict, her account standing against institutional silence or denial, is exactly the kind of ambiguous, charged material that makes her a convincing main character for a fabricated story. The rumor doesn't have to invent her personality. It just has to borrow it and redirect it at a new target. Where the Fever rumor actually comes from, and where it doesn't searching specifically for any reporting that Cambage received an offer from the Indiana Fever, or that she rejected one because of Stephanie White, turns up nothing from outlets with actual sourcing standards. No ESPN report, no Indy Star byline, no statement from the Fever organization, no quote attributed to Cambage by name in any interview about Indiana. What does turn up is a YouTube video built with the same dramatic structure and the same quotes as the version making the rounds. Lines about leaking the tapes, about a GM and ownership not caring, about witnesses to mistreatment. Tracing those quotes back, they appear to be lifted from Cambage's actual past comments about previous teams, comments made in entirely different contexts, years apart, about organizations that have nothing to do with Indiana, and re-stitched into a new, fabricated frame. This is a recognizable pattern in WNBA-adjacent content right now, and it's worth naming the mechanism plainly because it explains why the story spreads even though it isn't true. Take a real person with a real, sympathetic grievance history. Attach her, via invented dialogue, to whichever storyline is currently generating the most attention, and few storylines generate more attention right now than anything involving Caitlin Clark and her coaching staff. Borrow just enough true biographical detail, the scoring record, the real exits, the real skepticism she's faced, to make the new claim feel like it's consistent with what people already believe about her. Then let outrage do the rest of the work, because a claim that confirms what people are already inclined to suspect about institutional failure rarely gets fact-checked before it gets shared. What's actually happening between Clark and White? Because there's plenty, and it's documented. Here's the part of this story that deserves far more attention than the fabricated Cambage angle. Because it's real, it's recent, and it doesn't need any embellishment to be a legitimate storyline. On May 2, 2026, during a preseason game, and repeatedly through the season's opening weeks, tension between Clark and White has visibly surfaced in ways that have been captured on camera, addressed by both women directly, and covered extensively by mainstream sports media. The clearest flashpoint came during a blowout loss to the expansion Portland Fire. With 6:30 left in the first quarter and Indiana leading, White substituted out Clark, Lexi Hull, and Aaliyah Boston together. Portland responded with a 19-4 run, and by the end of the quarter led 29-15 ESPN. Fans immediately fixated on the timing, with some accusing White of deliberately sabotaging Clark. Though, as one outlet pointed out directly, there was no actual evidence supporting that theory. It was an internet theory, not a fact, Wikipedia. Later in that same game, a separate moment went viral. During a timeout, with Clark seated directly in front of her, White appeared to jab her finger in the air toward Clark while making a point, and the two had a visibly animated exchange before White substituted Clark out for rookie Raven Johnson, with Clark getting out of her seat and shaking her head in apparent frustration, roto wire. The reaction to that clip split sharply along predictable lines. Analyst Jason Whitlock publicly claimed White and assistant coach Brian January had sabotaged Clark with the early substitution, Basketball Reference.com. And Whitlock followed up weeks later suggesting a different tense sideline moment might have represented Clark's last game with White or the Fever altogether, pointing to small cues like a halftime interview that seemed redirected away from Clark and toward White instead, just women's sports. Fans piling on after a separate overtime win over Chicago accused White of humiliating Clark and mismanaging late-game possessions, with one fan publicly asking why the coach's ego was keeping the ball out of the best player's hands in crunch time, spot track. Both Clark and White have responded to this directly and repeatedly, on the record, in their own words.
Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a video.